On the surface, it would appear that the fallout from the entire Mike Israetel PhD saga is that he lost less than 1% of his total subscribers. But in my previous video, I took a historical look at the lineage behind Mike Israetel. And what I would say is all you're seeing is the surface level of what's really happening here. Mike Israetel comes from a long line of posers, people who use their credentials while simultaneously contributing nothing to science whatsoever. And that lineage will die. In my timeline video, I decided I wanted to put Gregor Mendel in this picture. Gregor Mendel is a real scientist who started by just studying pea plants. He was obsessed with pea plants. No one understood why. But he figured out the basics of genetics. He lived the rest of his life with no one really understanding why the hell he was going on about pea plants. But he said, "My day will come. People will understand eventually." This happened in the 1900s after he had been dead for decades. 3 different scientists independently verified what he had demonstrated. And then in the 50s, 1953, the double helix further solidified the significance of the work he'd done, but this coincides with Lysenkoism, the entire Soviet Union denying that science. So it's 100 years between Gregor Mendel showing the evidence and the end of the Lysenkoism period where everyone worldwide scientifically agrees, yeah, Mendel was right. So these things take a long time. Now we compare that to Matveyev and Tudor Bomper, who were able to use their position and their credentials to elevate themselves immediately into positions of power, and through that can just say whatever nonsense they want and no one questions it. That's the roots of periodization. Matter of fact, Matveyev was part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, the same Soviet Union that endorsed Lysenko, now considered the worst scientist in history, they are the people who selected and recognized Matveyev and his periodization. The lineage then goes to Tudor Bomper, and then Bomper worked with Mike Stone. So now Mike Stone is basically Tudor Bomper's disciple. He is involved in this PhD scandal. You can basically guarantee it, because how did Mike Israetel's PR team get access to the archives? How is it that East Tennessee University will just restrict access to a PhD on demand? Mike Stone is already clearly not taken seriously within the scientific community, especially of late. And now his credibility has all but disappeared. Now people are going to start looking back at Tudor Bomper and say, hang on a minute, how great of a scientist was this guy really? We've already had James Steele write The Myth of Periodization, showing that periodization really isn't science. And that got a good response from people in academia. The only person who came to the defense of periodization was Mike Stone. And he got 0 attention. He only had 1 reference. I know what that reference was because it was me. And all I said was, this guy's making spurious arguments. There exists a whole separate line of people who have been doing science, good science, exercise science, in the background. And those people are going to start getting recognition in the future. Once all this physiology line, so-called, which how much does physiology really inform us on how to exercise anyway? But regardless, none of these people have made any actual contribution to physiology. So how are they leveraging that to tell you how exactly you should exercise, how to micromanage people in all situations? I'll show you the full dynamic of what the periodization people, the physiology line, what they're really leveraging, okay? Because you can say periodization is established science, okay? Why do you think that? Periodization correlates with Olympic success. Now, during the Soviet period and during the period where Tudor Bomper brought periodization over to America, this was certainly true. But what are the mechanics, the causes behind that correlation? Because in real science, we don't just accept that and say correlation equals causation. Here's the thing. You have the entire Soviet state scouring their entire population looking for people with talent. So this is the whole selection bias scenario. If the athlete doesn't show promise, they go nowhere, they're irrelevant. If they do show promise, the athlete gains access to top coaches and PEDs. And this is the era where there was no testing and no one had ever been caught for Olympics. There was a decent period of time where Russia and America were both competing to out-steroid each other, and they're both using periodization at that time. Now imagine you're a coach and you reject periodization. You're like, this is nonsense. Well, you're irrelevant because you're never going to ascend and become a top coach. So if the coach affirms periodization, they go along with it, they can become a top coach, and now they get access to the top athletes. Because these coaches are using the athletes to bolster their credibility. So yeah, even Mike Stone was able to do an observational study with a very limited number of athletes in it and say, hey, periodization training correlates with better results at the Olympics. It wasn't statistically relevant or anything because there was only a few people in the study, but yeah, here's the thing. The top athletes get paired with the top coaches, and in order to be a top coach, you have to go along with periodization, because that's just how it was in both America and the Soviet Union, later Russia. So this is all a very superficial observed reality and experience. This is why you can't trust experience, and this is why we have the scientific method to begin with, and you're trying to debate with these sports scientists, and they just don't believe in science. They don't understand science. They don't think that science is important, but at the same time, they'll use science to try and make themselves look good. At some point, you just have to say this is a pointless argument. These people they can't be saved. They're too far gone. Now, I think in the current environment, it's much more likely that an athlete might be able to do their own thing or train differently and have success. But the thing is, will people recognize and understand the significance of their success? If the academics and the periodization people control the narrative, they can just ignore you. End of the day, no one ever calls them on their bullshit anyway, so why should they care? Except now, the mask is slipping. People are starting to notice that these people are not as smart as they would lead you to believe. I spent 3 years on a sports science degree. I'd never heard of Arthur Jones. I'd never heard of Mike Menzer or Dorian Yates. That's going to change. Dorian Yates has entered the chat. November 22nd, the Strength Forum is being held in Orlando, Florida. No one's paying attention to that in the mainstream. Next year, people are going to start taking notice. And the real scientists who have been doing proper science in the background are going to emerge and actually start having some influence. But we have to get rid of this bullshit first. From the historical view, Medvedev, Tudor Bomper, Mike Stone, not one of these people will be remembered as being scientists. And it won't be long before people will be embarrassed to be associated with periodization and that lineage in any way in academia. Everyone's going to be saying, oh, I never believed any of this stuff to begin with. So on the surface, it looks like nothing much has happened, but I guarantee you that whole lineage is done.